Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahawashi, Bahasham, Brakahakwadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who ruled and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure unto the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in 2nd Esdras chapter 9 in the Apocrypha, verse 1. He answered me then and said, Measure thou the time diligently in itself, which is exactly what the true men of the Lord, the prophets of the Most High, chiefly through GMS or Great Millstone, as well as the brothers that come in the spirit of GMS are doing by reading the scriptures and watching the news, and then filtering the news through the scriptures to go out onto the highways and byways to preach this word, as well as put up video epistles online telling the elect of the nation of Israel of the terrible times to come and what they need to do to stay in the good graces of their power, Yahweh Bahasham Yahawashi, to be safe from them, and to also tell 2/3 of the nation of Israel who are, the wicked of our people in general, you rebellious so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans who don't want to acknowledge that your Israelites are returned under your power, as well as these heathen nations out here of the terrible judgments to come from Yahweh Bahasham Yahawashi for all the wickedness you've been committing. And when thou seest part of the signs past, which I have told thee before, then shalt thou understand that it is the very same time wherein the highest will begin to visit the world which he made, to judge you people again for all the wickedness you've been committing on it. Therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes and uproars of the people in the world, then shalt thou well understand that the Most High spake of those things from the days that were before thee, even from the beginning. For like as all that is made in the world hath a beginning and an end, and the end is manifest. And if you've got that spiritual eye salve, you can clearly see that all these end-time signs that were said to take place in the last days are either in the process of taking place or taking place as we speak. And as it says up in verse 3, they include earthquakes, which are happening damn near daily all across the planet in diverse places, as it says in Matthew chapter 24. And it also says in Matthew chapter 24 that in the last days there would be pestilences and famines, nations rising against nations, kingdom against kingdom, wars and rumors of wars. And back in 2nd Esdras chapter 9 verse 3, uproars of the people in the world, which is what I'll be dealing with in this video. And I've got a few clips from Wyon's YouTube channel, which just goes to show that people are in an uproar or in protests all across the planet for a whole host of reasons. This cost of living crisis, where in Europe, due to the situation going on with Ukraine, gas and other natural resource prices are rising. So people are really having to start facing whether they're going to pay for gas or food or their rent. They won't be able to pay for all three. You've got workers in France protesting that they're not getting paid enough. And then just people in general protesting against their governments because they're seeing that they're not for their best interests. And all these different issues are only going to be exacerbated as we get closer and closer to the end of all things, the end of this current age of the rulership of the heathen nations, chiefly of the biblical Edomites, or the so-called white people, and the second coming of Yahawashi Hamashiach, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, and finally, the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven under the children of Israel. But now I'm going to go to my first clip on Wyon, titled Gravitas, Protests in Paris Over Cost of Living Crisis. And this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply for educational purposes.
Where thousands took to the streets of Paris on Sunday. In fact, France's new Nobel laureate, Annie Ernaux, was among them. The rally was called by left-wing parties opposed to President Emmanuel Macron. People marched to express their anger at the cost of living crisis. Our next report gets you all the on-ground details. Take a look.
Around 30,000 Parisians marched in protest on Sunday. The reason for their ire was the cost of living crisis. Public anger has been building in France for a while. Fuel shortages have added to the public's woes. A general strike has been called on Tuesday. There are fears of renewed yellow jacket protests. So what has led to this outpouring of anger in France? Let's start with the immediate troubles. Refinery workers have been striking in the country since the end of September. They demand a rise in wages. The strike has caused fuel supplies to gas stations to dry up. About 30% of France's petrol pumps face shortages. The shortages are particularly bad in Paris and northern France. People have been queuing up for hours to refuel. French people are being inconvenienced, but reports say more than 30% support the striking refinery workers. They believe the workers should get their due.
Those in charge of Total Energy earn a lot. They have made a lot of profit, and it's normal that the employees demand their dues. Some people are saying they already earn a lot. The problem is not there. It's a question of purchasing power. It's not because we earn 2,000 euros per month that our purchasing power should decrease. What we want is for everybody to live decently with the purchasing power we had before.
The public is furious at perceived windfall profits being made by energy companies. This is while they are suffering from the effects of inflation, and that is why they are marching.
We have a few demands. For me, being here shows that we must act and resist exploitation. As for the cost of living, we have an inflation at 6%, but if we take consumer goods into account, it's more, 10%. So the loss of purchasing power is at 10%. Basically, a drop in salaries. That's what it comes down to.
The Russia-Ukraine war is fueling a cost of living crisis. Europe in particular has been badly hit. Most European nations
And best believe it's not just a situation going on in Ukraine that's causing a bunch of these issues. The elites, such as the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Gettys, the Massimos, the Merovingians, you name it, the WEF and all these other organizations are ready to bring about that NW0, that GREAT, that fourth industrial revolution, and that calls for putting a lot of people across the planet in a lot of pain, economically, food-wise, with food shortages and insecurity, and a whole host of other issues to get people desperate out here to be able to be in a situation to accept anything they bring to them. That order ab chaos, that order out of chaos, which is also ultimately going to be predicated upon people receiving the charagma, the MARKOFTHEBEAST in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, which is the RFID/NFC MICROCHIPIMPLANT.
facing sharply rising inflation. The latest IMF data presents a grim picture, and reports say they could even go into recession. This is because they were dependent on cheap Russian gas. Now that the tap is drying up, ordinary citizens are facing the burden. The cost to import fuel has gone up. As a result, the price of energy has shot up too. It's more expensive to keep the lights on in Europe, so governments have been shutting them off where they can. Iconic landmarks like the Eiffel Tower went dark.
And at these protests, people are still being relatively calm. But as the situation continues to deteriorate and they get more and more into winter, and it gets colder there, and then inflation turns into hyperinflation, and there's less food on the shelves, these people are going to get much more violent. And best believe that blood will flow through the streets, and not just of Europe, but in the United States of America and countries all across the planet.
But winter is approaching. Energy will be needed to keep homes warm, and people don't want to be forced to choose between food or warmth. They want to be able to afford everything they could before the war. People just want things to go back to normal. Most EU governments are backing Ukraine, but they are facing challenges at home. In France, the left wing is trying to capitalize on public anger. Italy and Sweden have seen the rise of right-wing governments. Anti-EU parties have been holding massive rallies in countries like the Czech Republic.
Anti-EU parties are seeing the division between the iron toes mixed with miry clay in Daniel chapter 2.
European citizens are now asking their governments.
I believe there was also an anti-NATO protest that just took place in France as well.
What about us?
Beyond World is One is now available in your...
That's it with my first clip. Now I'm going to go to my second clip titled Gravitas, France. Workers clash with cops during protest for better pay. Hey, things beginning to start starting to get more rowdy, more violent at these protests. And again, this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily, simply for educational purposes. And I'm only going to play about the first minute or so of this clip.
France, Italy, Belgium, Spain. 4 leading European economies. All 4 have witnessed mass protests in recent days.
Uproars of the people in the world.
All 4 happened because of exactly the same reasons. Rising food prices, out of control energy bills, and lower wages. Basically, the ongoing cost of living crisis. It is now hitting Europe hard. Today, Europe witnessed one more protest in France. Yes, the European power is quickly becoming a hotspot for these protests. Just look at these visuals. Over the weekend, we saw large crowds on the streets of Paris, and today, trade unions took to the streets. There was a massive crowd on the streets of Paris. And going by some reports, scuffles broke out between the cops and the protesters.
I can't. My toes.
Turns out, it is hard walking a mile in someone else's shoes.
And it turns out.
So what do these protesters want? They are demanding...
I say with that clip, you get the point. But expect to see more threats and attacks towards people in the government, as well as the authorities that uphold the system, which is also a part of biblical prophecy. This is 2 Esdras chapter 15. In the Apocrypha, I'm going to start at verse 15. For the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another. And that one people standing up and fighting against another goes into many things. One race of people standing up and fighting against another, nations rising against nations. And in that first clip I played from Wyon, there was talks about the rise of right-wing parties in Europe over all these issues going on. And you know what a lot of that entails? Xenophobia, getting rid of the others, the non-Edomites out of the country, which is going to lead to violence over there as well as over in the U.S. Hey, one political class of people fighting against another, left versus right, conservative versus liberal, class warfare, rich versus poor, And the average everyday person going against those in the government and swords in their hands, and especially in the United States of America, the modern day sword is the gun, but people are going to be using bats, sticks, clubs, knives, machetes, literal swords, chains, Molotov cocktails, hammers, anything they can get their hands on. But here's the main point. For there shall be sedition among men. And the definition for sedition means conduct or speech inciting open rebellion against a ruling authority or monarch and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes. And your modern day kings and princes are these people in the government. Mayors, governors, senators, presidents, prime ministers, as well as the authorities that uphold the system, like the police or the military. And as we just saw in that second clip, there were scuffles taking place with the police in France, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. And like I said, violence against people in the government and the authorities that uphold the system are only going to intensify as we get closer to the end. But now I'm going to play my last clip from Wyon titled Tunisia. Protesters chant, "The coup will fall," demand accountability for country's economic crisis. Uproars of the people all across the planet in many diverse areas. And once more, this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply for educational purposes.
Protests erupted in Tunisia against President Kais Saied on Saturday. Thousands of people demonstrated in the capital, denouncing a power grab by Saied, who they blame for the country's worsening economic situation. The protesters demanded accountability for the country's long-running economic crisis. They chanted, "Down, down, revolution against dictator Kais, and the coup will fall."
For there shall be sedition amongst men, conduct or speech inciting open rebellion against a ruling authority or monarch.
نظمناها المسيرة هذه هي من أجل التعبير مرة أخرى على رفضنا للتمشيات السياسية اللي أعلن عليها قيس سعيد ورفضنا للانتخابات القادمة، لأنه الهدف من الانتخابات هذه هي مزيد معناها تقوية الاستبداد والدكتاتورية في البلاد.
Footage also showed demonstrators clashing with police at night in the capital. Riot police fired tear gas to disperse crowds of demonstrators who then threw stones and petrol bombs at the police. A vehicle was also seen burning in the street.
جيت باش نساند الديمقراطية في بلادنا، جيت ضد الانقلاب. هاي باش نوصل صوتي اللي أنا ضد اللي قاعد يصير في تونس. خاطر كل شيء تمس في تونس وكل شيء تنحى في تونس والمؤسسات الدولة كل تنحات، قاعدة حاجة بركة مش معقول تونس يحكمها شخص واحد. بالنسبة لي أنا مش مقبول أنه تونس يحكمها شخص واحد.
A vehicle was also seen burning in the street. National Salvation Front, a coalition of the opposition parties, organized this march. It has announced that it will boycott a December vote to elect a new parliament with very limited powers. Meanwhile, some Tunisians resorted to unique ways of protesting, carrying empty containers to symbolize the rising cost of water due to inflation, which has hit 9.1% in September. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund announced on Saturday that it has reached a tentative agreement with the Tunisian government. Under the deal, IMF will unblock a $1.9 billion loan to alleviate the economic crisis. Now, under the 4-year accord, which still requires the approval of the IMF board, Tunisia has committed to undertake a comprehensive economic reform program as it gets access to the money. The economic crisis in the country of 12 million got compounded by the supply shortages in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This, as the country's president has argued that he has been working to correct the economic trouble which he had inherited from his previous presidents. Kais Saied staged a power grab in July last year. He later pushed through a constitution on a one-man rule. Critics have called this move a return to autocracy in the only democracy to have emerged from the Arab Spring.
So with that clip, but as we can see, with each passing day, biblical prophecy continues to take place and intensify. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope your sincere Akim and Akwat were edified. Just keep strong. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.